All right, everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is Nerd Level Rising. My name's Jake, and today I wanted to talk about some trilogies. So I've made a couple videos now on my channel about like these long epic series that I really want to get to. I made a video about some sci-fi I really want to get to. I've seen a bunch of other booktubers talk about like their high priority series that they really want to get to soon. And so I had these ideas swirling around in my head, and I was like, you know what, maybe like a slightly different take on those things is, what are some higher priority trilogies that I really want to get to? Trilogies are awesome. Like, as much as I have two videos about it, right? As much as I love these huge, long epics, I also love trilogies too, because they're just a little bit more condensed. You know, you can really get into the meat of a story. You get a beginning, middle, and end in a much shorter time frame, and you just get to experience more things when the things are shorter. So that's the idea behind this. So I want to talk about actually 15 trilogies that I really want to get to that are on my list, that have been on my list for a while, that, I have more stuff on my list. My list is endless, like so many people here. But these are the ones that I think I feel the most drawn towards doing on the sooner side. And these, just a few rules, I guess, for myself is, one, if I've talked about it in another video, I'm not going to mention it here. So if I've talked about, for example, the the Farseer trilogy, obviously, that's a huge priority for me. But I already talked about the Realm of the Elderlings in one of my big, long, epic fantasy, or big, long, epic series I want to get to videos. Or the Three Body Problem I really want to check out, but I talked about that in my sci-fi video. So if I've already talked about it elsewhere, I'm not going to talk about it here. I also don't know for sure when I'm going to get to these. This is not, anything that's planned or written down in permanent ink or anything like that. These are just things that I'm really interested in doing. I am only including completed trilogies, so that's why you're not going to see the Kingkiller Chronicle, for example. I do really want to read that. I've heard mixed things about The Name of the Wind, but I think that I would really like it, and I think I'll like the whole story, but it's not finished. So I wanted to keep this like that. And the other thing is that these are in no particular order. These are not ranked. These are not numbered in any way. These are just sort of the order that I thought them up as I was glancing through my list. Okay, so here we go. Here's the list. These are 15 trilogies that I really want to check out. Number 1, and it pains me to even have Joe Abercrombie on this list, but I gotta check out the Age of Madness trilogy, because I've still only read the original First Law trilogy, and I absolutely loved it. And Joe Abercrombie is just brilliant everyone knows how brilliant he is at writing characters, but it's more than that. The action scenes are just fantastic. The whole story, the themes that he's exploring, the way that he's turning your sort of classic fantasy quest, the Lord of the Rings framework on its head, and doing all these really new, interesting things. I love it so much. Glock is one of my favorite characters ever. Logan is an amazing character. Jazal is an amazing character. Everything about it I loved. And I'm not even one of those people that were like, yeah, it's great, but the Blade itself really has no plot, or like, that's not even really, I still love the Blade itself. And I thought that there was a story there. Was it only driven by the story? No. But anyway, so I want to do more First Law. I really need to do the standalones first and the short stories, and then I'll get into the Age of Madness. But I really want to do the Age of Madness because I've only heard that it's really the best, or at least the better of the two trilogies anyway. Some people really prefer some of those standalones, but for the most part, tons and tons of praise out there for the Age of Madness. So I got to get to that at some point. Number 2 on here is the Empires of Dust trilogy by Anna Smith Spark. And this one is on the list because I am definitely a Grimdark fan. And I have heard Anna Smith Spark's name thrown around quite a bit as somebody who does a very good job with Grimdark. And that's enough for me, And I think about even just the titles of the books are cool. It's something like that. That's, I'm a simple guy. You give me a fantasy trilogy with some Grimdark stuff with cool titles to your books. Usually that's enough to get me interested. So I really want to check that out. Anna Smith Spark is somebody, like I said, I've heard her name quite a few times. And I know she's gotten some good accolades for her work in the Grimdark subgenre as well. So definitely want to check that one out. The Ranger Archives by Philip C. Quaintrell. I talked about the Echo Saga in one of my long, 10 long series I want to get to videos. This is the trilogy that really started. This was, as far as I'm aware, the first trilogy that he wrote. And this is all within that same big, massive universe that he's done. He did this, and then the Echo Saga, and then now there's this Time of Dragons series, and it's all kind of interconnected, and I love that kind of stuff. But I do think a trilogy is probably a good place to start with a new author rather than jumping into the big, 9-book epic Echoes saga. So I don't know much more about this one other than that. I know it's kind of your classical, or at least I've heard it's sort of your classical fantasy. It's obviously got some modern stuff to it. A lot of these modern self-published authors are doing some things that are a little bit different. And that's really cool. That's really enticing and really makes me even more excited to read it. Like I said, I love the interconnected universe stuff. If one of the series, I believe it's the prequel series that he's doing now, The Time of Dragons, there's dragons, apparently, right? So I think it's a safe assumption. So I'm excited to check that one out at some point as well. Next on the list is the Manifest Delusions series by Michael R. Fletcher. And this is another one, you call yourself a grimdark fan, you better check out some Michael R. Fletcher at some point. And that's really why it's on the list. And he's got a bunch of books, man. And I really, I want to check all of them out, but I've put this on the list first, just because I think this is his most well-known trilogy. I know that I can't remember the name of the trilogy itself, but the one that starts with Blackstone Heart, I know is supposed to be really, Obsidian Path, I think, is supposed to be really, really good as well. And, I want to check it out for those reasons, in that, I've heard that his books can be very grimdark and just gross and all that stuff. But I also have, over the last several months, periodically been listening through this podcast called Wizards, Warriors, and Words, if anyone's interested in writing. Really cool podcast. It's Michael R. Fletcher, Rob J. Hayes, Dirk Ashton, and Jed Hearn. The whole podcast is just about writing advice, and with Michael R. Fletcher being on there and hearing a lot of things that he has to say, not only about his books, but just about his process and about writing in general and his style and all of those things, it makes me even more intrigued to check out his work. So Manifest Delusions by Michael R. Fletcher. And along those same lines, for similar reasons, is the Paternus Trilogy by Dirk Ashton. That, I'm interested in his work from listening to him on that podcast, but also from the pitch that I have heard of it being sort of like an adult Percy Jackson kind of thing, where there's a lot of Greek mythology in there. I think I think it's not only Greek mythology. I could be mistaken, but I think it's mainly Greek mythology, and it's sort of an aged up version of that kind of style stuff. I would imagine that there's some similarities to something like the God of War video games that I absolutely love, and just that anything to do with Greek and Egyptian mythology, I've always thought are just the coolest thing ever. And so to get that wrapped into an adult fantasy, to me, very intriguing and something I definitely want to check out. So Paternus Trilogy by Dirk Ashton is on the list as well. Next up here is the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. This one is another one that I know very little about the actual subject matter of the trilogy. You'll notice a theme through some of these, right? That I don't always know even a synopsis of the trilogy. Like, I didn't read the synopsis before, putting this list together or anything like that. A lot of these are on the list because it's something with the style of the work, or with the there's some sort of less tangible thing related to the series that makes me really want to read it. And that is very evident, I think, here with the Broken Earth Trilogy, in that I don't know hardly anything about it, but I do know that there is a very divisive element to particularly the first book, with the use of the second person writing style. And that, I've never read anything like that before. I know some people, it's really weird, and then when it clicks at the end, they say it's mind-blowing. Other people just hate it and DNF the book, and I don't know, right? So I don't know how I will feel, but I really want to check it out for myself and find out what it feels like and what it's like. And I know N.K. Jemisin's written quite a few books, and she's somebody who I'm just interested in seeing what her work is like in general, right? So what better place to start than right there, something that's really interesting and different, and taking a risk, right? It's always fun when writers take a risk like that, just to see where you fall, right, on the line of how that risk works for you or doesn't work for you. Next is the Powder Mage Trilogy by Brian McClellan. This one really was on my radar from, as you can see from my bookshelf, I'm a big Brandon Sanderson fan, and seeing his podcast, and he has talked about Brian McClellan multiple times, And as talked about, he was a student of Sanderson's. He's obviously a successful writer himself now. And Sanderson actually mentioned that if he were to, God forbid, pass away before he finished the Cosmere, that Brian McClellan will be the person that he would ask to finish it if he were to ever ask somebody to do that. He might just leave it. But if that situation were to come to pass, that Brian was like the person he might consider to step in and finish it off. And I was like, okay, well, that's interesting to say the least. And, I hear about his Powder Mage trilogy and how, you have this flintlock fantasy, right, where we have guns. And I believe it's like a gun or gunpowder related magic system. Like, that sounds super cool. Coming from sort of the Sanderson school of fantasy writing, I would imagine it's a hard magic system and sort of a scientific magic system, which I always find interesting. I love both hard and soft magic, right? I like the whole spectrum, but it's always kind of fun when you get those Sanderson-esque, like really like science systems more than magic systems sometimes. But for those reasons, right, kind of flintlock stuff that I've never read any of that before. Interesting magic system, somebody who, has the stamp of approval from one of my favorite authors. And, all of that together makes me really want to check it out. And I know that some of his books, I believe, have gotten the broken binding treatment, which typically the books that they go in and make special editions of are ones that tend to click for me. So, yeah, that's really cool. And speaking of a series the Broken Binding has done, we got to talk about the Green Bone Saga by Fonda Lee. And this is one that is on my list primarily because of, again, it's just something different from what I've read before. It's something, getting more into, I've heard Mafia, I've heard Godfather comparisons. I've heard, urban fantasy that's really grounded in the characters, and there's not, there's magic, but it's not like the predominant thing. It's mostly about the house politics and the interactions and the boots on the ground, really just the base level stuff of how people interact with each other and, how these conflicts can arise and all this stuff. And to me, I'm like, that sounds awesome. That sounds, I haven't read a ton of stuff like that. I've not read much urban fantasy before. And I typically have read more like high fantasy, epic fantasy, that kind of stuff. So that sounds really cool. That sounds really interesting. Obviously, the last couple of years, BookTube has just exploded with Greenbone content. Everybody loves the Greenbone Saga. So I definitely got to check that one out. It's a sort of a hole in my resume as a reader of fantasy and as a booktuber at this point. So we got to get it on the list for sure. Greenbone by Fonda Lee. This one is probably the newest addition to my list, and that is the Night's Dawn trilogy by Peter F. Hamilton. So we got a sci-fi series here. This one was highly recommended by my friend TJ over on Instagram. Her handle is Shelf Singularity, and she's super cool. She's doing a PhD. She's similar to me, doing a PhD, but also trying to find time to read all these books. And so she was really, really talking a lot about how fantastic this trilogy is and sort of Peter F. Hamilton's books in general. And it just got me super interested, getting into a sci-fi that is, it's hard enough that it kind of, the description she was giving me sort of sounded similar to Sun Eater, where you have the physics and the science that are explained to enough of an extent that it feels very real and it feels believable, but it's not overdone to the point where, at least for me, that I wouldn't check out or be like, this is like, reading a textbook or whatever. It doesn't feel like that. It still feels, it's toned down enough to where it's digestible, but it's there enough to where it feels real and believable and makes the world feel more fleshed out. And I like that a lot, right? I like that idea in my sci-fi. And just the ideas and the things like that are being explored sound very interesting to me. So we gotta check that one out. Night's Dawn trilogy, Peter F. Hamilton. I got his some other books that he's written are on my list as well. But there we go. Next one, Kagan the Damned by Jonathan Mayberry. So I have said several times on this channel, I am not a horror reader. I would like to try it at some point, but I just haven't gotten into it yet. And I think that a good starting point could be something like this. Could be like something like Kagan the Damned, because I have heard from people like Andrew's Wizardly Reads or John from Talking Story who have mentioned this series before, these books before, that there is definitely horror elements there. It's not strict. It's not like Stephen King horror per se, but it has those elements there. So it could be a good entry point for me. And it just sounds like a fun ride. Sometimes I just want something that's, a little more straightforward. Just give me some brutal violence, it's just some creepy stuff. That sounds really cool. And again, like I mentioned before, sometimes I'm an easy sell with the name. Kagan the Damned is an awesome name for a book or for a series, and that's enough for me, dude. It's enough for me. So Kagan the Damned is on the list, man. I like most of these, I don't know a ton about it, but it's on the list nonetheless. It's got that just enough of an interesting new flavor for me to check it out. You know what I mean? Next one, and this is, I kind of had to go back and forth to choose what trilogy to put on here for this author, but I've never read any Mark Lawrence before. And what I ended up choosing as my sort of higher priority one would be the Library Trilogy. And the reason for that is because hearing things from like Philip Chase, for example, or some other people who have read the Library Trilogy books, the two that are out, I believe book 3 is due to come out in 2025. So pretty soon we'll be finished. So I broke my rule a little bit, but by the time I would get to this trilogy anyway, it'll be complete. So it's okay. But what entices me into this trilogy so much is the intellectual, philosophical journey that seems to really be there, that you're sort of taken along as the reader. And, similarly to a lot of these other ones, there's that little new flavor, right? That little different thing, that little hook that grabs me. And that's what grabs me with this one, is just that idea of, it's about the story and it's about the characters, I'm sure. And, there's a lot of really interesting things going on, I'm sure. But it's also just really about that intellectual journey that you're sort of going through as you progress through the story. At least that's my thoughts based on what I've heard other people talk about. So Library Trilogy by Mark Lawrence. I also would be interested in the, what is the... is it called the Prince of Thorns trilogy? Is that what it's called? I'd be interested in trying that one, or a lot of his books. I know they're kind of hit and miss with people sometimes, but I definitely would like to check out his work at some point. So what better place than that, Next one. Sometimes, like I mentioned, I want something really dark. And I will admit, sometimes how dark a book has gotten oversold to me. And this, I might get yelled at for saying this. When I read The First Law, it had built up so much to me how grimdark this is. And when I read The First Law, I was just like, yeah, it's not that crazy, like, I don't, obviously there's dark things in there. Obviously it's grimdark. But, and I'm not just talking about the humor that's in there, right? Like, to me, the humor makes the grimdark stuff even more grimdark, right? It's sort of that light really makes the darkness seem even darker. But it just, I wasn't let down in any way, but I was expecting it to be even darker. And so I've kind of been on the lookout for more grimdark, because I want something like, just crush me, dude. That's what I want. Just give me something that's depressing and horrible and just, ugh. And it's kind of seeming like, after watching a lot of Mike from Mike's Book Reviews, after watching a lot of his recent content, hearing people like Philip, like Joanna talking about this series, if anything's going to give me that feeling, it seems like it's The Prince of Nothing by R. Scott Baker. And every video that I see of any of those people discussing this series, where they're talking about just how grimdark it is, makes me want to read it more and more. It keeps inching its way up my list, and it's probably one of the higher priority ones of this whole list, just because of, I want something that's really dark, man. I want to see, what does that extreme look like in fantasy? What does that end of the spectrum really, really look like? And I think that will help to just expand my scope as a reader, to expand, how I feel about grimdark in general. It just gives me some other anchor to compare some things to. You know what I mean? So that's a really exciting one for me to. Exciting is kind of a weird word for that, but it is exciting. Like I said, I want something that's really dark. So Prince of Nothing by R. Scott Baker. We got to make it happen at some point. Different change from that, right? This is something that I have no idea if the series is like this, but for whatever reason, I have such a positive vibe that I always get when I think about this series, or when I hear the name, or I see the author or anything like that. And that is the Threadlight trilogy by Zach Argyle. That I don't know why it feels like it's such a happy, almost like golden retriever version of a fantasy trilogy. It's probably not. That's probably way off base. I'm sure there's a bunch of crazy stuff that happens in the trilogy itself. But this is one that I want to check out because, number one, the books aren't super long. That's always kind of nice sometimes as a fantasy fan. A lot of these, 7, 8, 1,200 page books can, it's nice to have a 300-400 pager to just kind of slot in there sometimes. And, hearing that's pretty fast paced, again, kind of a Sanderson-esque magic system that's fun for me sometimes. And, Zach, the author, from his newsletters and things like that, he just seems like a really nice dude. And that's something that always makes me excited to check out people's books, And the Kickstarter that he did for that is just gorgeous. I didn't get it, unfortunately. But I'm a sucker for seeing a beautiful special edition like that. It just makes me want to read the series even more, right? Seeing all the art, seeing all the care and attention that went into the new cover and the spine and all of that. It just really, I don't know, it gets me. So, Threadlight by Zach Argyle, got to be on the list. Next one, second to last one here. This is the Godblind trilogy by Anna Stevens. This one I probably know the least about of any on this list. And this is it's kind of like when I got The Inheritance of Magic by Benedict Jacques, and I said that I bought that pure impulse buy from the title of the book and the cover. This one, the Godblind trilogy, is a complete, I want to check it out just because of the name. I just think that name is super cool. It rolls off the tongue. It immediately tells me that there's going to be some big epic things happening. There's probably going to be a lot of dark stuff that's happening. And it just makes me want to read it. And I've heard Anna Stevens' name thrown around before, with quite a bit of praise. So that's really all I have to say about this one. It's a cool name. I'm a sucker for a cool name. Here we go. Let's check out the Godblind trilogy. And the last one, to round out my list, this is the Nevernight Chronicle by Jay Kristoff. And I chose this because the Empire of the Vampire, whatever that, I assume it's going to be a trilogy, whatever that trilogy is called, is not finished yet, and there's not like a release date for book 3. I believe he finished his draft of book 3, so it's probably getting relatively close, potentially might come out next year, I don't know. But just because there's no set release date, I couldn't bend my rule and called that an unfinished trilogy at the moment. So, but I do want to get into some Jay Kristoff, and I've heard some very good things about Nevernight Chronicle, and I've, again, I don't know much about the plot, but I know that there is some edginess to it, shall we say, that sounds, I haven't read anything like that, so that sounds really interesting to me. And, what little I've gotten, little tiny hints of edginess in books, I'm always just like, oh, that was fun, So I would be excited to check out something where that's a little bit more prominent in the writing style and the story. And Jay Kristoff is somebody who I hear endless amazing things about, especially about the Empire of the Vampire, Empire of the Damned, that I gotta check those out, right? I really do. As a fantasy fan who loves Halloween, and who wants to dip his toe into horror but is a little hesitant, like, what better starting point than Empire of the Vampire? I don't know why I haven't done it yet, but we gotta make some Jay Kristoff happen at some point. So that's on the list, Nevernight Chronicle. There's that. And that's 15. That's enough for one video. Anyway, there's a bunch more trilogies on my list that I want to check out, and I'm sure that there's a million more that I haven't even heard of. So in the comments, please let me know. Give me recommendations. I said my TBR is a mile long. I want it to be 2 miles long. Right? I love getting recommendations for you guys, and it's so much fun just to see what all is out there. So let me know, what are some trilogies that you've really loved, things that either are not on this list or that you don't think that I've read before, or even regardless of that, if you just think I'd really like it, throw it out to me. I love hearing about that stuff. Have you read any of these on this list that I just threw out? What did you think? No spoilers, please, but let me know what you thought. And let's talk in the comments, dude. That's so fun. That's the funnest part of this whole thing, is talking in the comments. Leave a thumbs up on the video if you liked it. That always helps. And if you are here, you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. I love seeing that subscriber count go up, reach more people, have more conversations, talk to more people in the comments. All that kind of stuff is awesome. I also, just love seeing the number go up, right? That's fun too. I'm getting relatively close to 1,000 now, which is unbelievable. I'm up over 900 subscribers, which is crazy. And I'm not going to lie, my goal-driven personality, that piece of me is definitely like, oh, we're getting close to 1,000. Let's see it. And I'm just excited. But that, as I've said before, since day one of this channel, while I do love seeing the channel grow, and that's really fun, and it's validating, and it's just a cool aspect of this whole thing, the biggest thing is the relationships and just having cool conversations with people about the stuff that we love. Thankfully, that is a wonderful thing that comes along with more subscribers, so that's really cool. But also, just like I said in the comments, that's the best part. Talk to me. Let's have fun. Let's raise our nerd levels together. I'll see you in the next video.